Hello, I'm Chantaline Carpentier. I'm the chief of the UN Conference on Trade and Development New York office of the Secretary General. Welcome to this third session of the Capital as a Force for Good initiative at the WIF 2021. Force for Good is a UN collaborator that has engaged some of the largest financial institutions on being a positive force to the world and has produced a number of reports and captured the industry's engagement on critical topics, including funding the SDGs. We are delighted to partner with them to bring in some of the leading financial institutions to the World Investment Forum. The first two panels have covered the need for a systemic approach to solve the world's challenges and how some of the world's largest asset managers are allocating capital to do so. This final session will focus on the people on the front line, chief investment officers and chief sustainability officers, and what they are doing to make the fundamental shift that is needed. We are delighted to have Ketan Patel and John Miller return to moderate this discussion. For those of you just joining, Ketan Patel is the founder and chairman of Force for Good, and John Miller is a director. Ketan is also the CEO and founder of Greater Pacific Capital, formerly managing director of the head of strategic group at Goldman Sachs and a partner at KPMG. He's also the author of The Master Strategist. John is a highly experienced tech and media business leader with global experience of mobilizing people at major events such as Global Citizen and Live Aid. He is a partner in Investec Capital and former director at BBC News Worldwide, as well as the former chairman and CEO of digital media at News Corp and AOL. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chantaline. And look, thank you very much for all the work you've done on this initiative, and your colleague Will Kennedy from the Office of Partnerships too. The background is very important, and it is that we see capital as a force for good. And we're delighted to be back in the third panel of a series of 3 at the United Nations World Investment Forum hosted by UNCTAD. As Chantaline has mentioned, Force for Good seeks to unlock the potential of capital to be a force for good in the world. The initiative is presenting a series of these very high impact sessions, exploring 3 things. And if you haven't had a chance to see the previous 2 panels, please do. You'll see that we interviewed 6 CEOs in total across asset management, insurance, managing high net worth individuals' wealth, and from the developing world also for affordable housing. In each of the sessions, we explored the challenges facing the world, the initiatives of the finance industry to address these, and the big ideas and themes that are very important to change the world's transition to a more sustainable and inclusive future. Our research from our report shows that the finance industry is increasingly active and ambitious in addressing change. The world needs approximately $10 trillion per year for the next 10 years to address the challenges of the SDGs. Now, this is obviously huge, and it's committed $10 trillion already to this cause. $88 trillion has also been committed to climate change. But the challenge, taken across a 10-year period, means that we still need the first 10 trillion to be multiplied by 10 to meet the overall targets. While much more is ultimately needed, the industry appears completely willing to move in the right direction. And we've heard that in the previous 2 panels a lot. Speaking to the CEOs, presidents, chairmen of very large institutions that mobilize huge amounts of capital, they've shown they have a real commitment to this. This session, therefore, focuses on the actual execution of these strategies. So CEOs, boards, and leaders have laid out what they wish to happen. But without the people on the front line making sure that it does happen, that there is execution, that won't actually happen, of course. Let me turn to my friend and colleague, John, to reflect also on this big challenge and this session.
Thank you, Ketan. As you know, I've been the leader of a number of large corporations and invested in many others. And one thing I think anyone who's been in those positions knows is that vision and strategy are absolutely essential, but without execution, we don't end up with much at the end of the day. So we are focusing on execution now. And it falls to the finance industry as a whole to embrace the kind of need that we've explored today and really to fund and be part of the change that is needed. And we know it's an incredibly dynamic world with increasing competition, regulatory frameworks, ever increasing technology change, and very important societal and social driven change that is also linked to technology. So now we can examine how we embrace this kind of change in specific organizations that can help show us the way. And we can do it both from the top down and the bottom up. We need both. And with that, we look forward to this panel very much.
Let me introduce our panel to you. First, we have Marisa Drew, Chief Sustainability Officer and Global Head of Sustainability, Strategy, Advisory and Finance at Credit Suisse. Secondly, we have Rick LaCale, Executive Vice President and Senior Investment Advisor at State Street Global Advisors. He also leads and coordinates the firm's ESG initiatives. And thirdly, we have Tanya Dos Santos of Investec, who is the Global Head of Sustainability there. Thank you. Let me start with the first question. What is your organization's mission, priorities, and commitments to making a big shift to the world's sustainable development? Marisa, let me start with you.
Well, first of all, delighted to be here and very pleased to share our thoughts and a little bit the journey that we've been on. I believe I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for Credit Suisse, and I believe in that capacity, my mission is to mobilize capital at scale to help solve some of the world's biggest challenges. So at a very high level and philosophically and from an ethos point of view, that's a little bit our North Star that guides us. And the way we express that is in some cases for and on behalf of our clients. So helping to engage them to participate. So it's through the provision of their capital as individuals or as institutions. It's also to provide the advice to move markets, to help the high carbon emitting industries transition, to fund the disruptors. You know, it's all about this getting capital to where it's needed to help do our part to solve some of the funding gaps. And then with our own organization, it's to continuously push ourselves, whether it's on a climate agenda or whether it's social topics, to set goals for ourselves and then push ourselves as an organization to try to meet those goals. And I think it's that aspirational challenge that in some respects captures hearts and minds. So in a complex organization, sometimes it can be difficult because you're trying to bring people along with a change agenda, and we want to move faster than perhaps the organization's ready to. But at the same time, I think if you're able to express that mission-driven approach, it does light a fire for people. And I think fundamentally people are seeking a purpose-driven existence in their work lives, more so than we've ever seen, and certainly I've ever seen in my 30-year career. And the more that you can make that linkage with what people do every day is, I think, the more chance you have of success and embedding it in your organization.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you on that purpose-driven mission that individuals are seeking today too. Let me ask Rick to come in on the same question. Rick, in terms of State Street and their priorities, mission, commitment to this big shift, how do you see that?
Thank you, Keaton. I mean, the purpose of the organization is to help the world's investors and asset managers become more and more effective in what they're doing. And that very much includes their own journey towards sustainability as well as ours as an institution. We're a very large at-scale asset manager as well as custodian. And we're a GSIB, so we're important in a sense of the stability of the financial system as well. Although unlike many GSIBs, our balance sheet's not actually that large. But when we think about the impact that State Street has on the world, it comes in a number of dimensions. One is we're a very large asset manager. So with our clients, we're managing a large amount of money. And those assets under a thoughtful stewardship and engagement program are deployed in a way that's going to make a change in terms of a more effective journey for those portfolio companies. Secondly, we're a custodian, and obviously we help through that business our clients, the largest asset owners in the world, and the asset managers do a better job, understand what's in their portfolio and become more effective through the research that we deliver and also the data analytics. But we are a big employer, and I think in financial services, it's a well-played industry. We need to be mindful of that impact as well on employees, on communities in which we're operating. So the impacts are various. We're obviously mindful of our physical impact as well. But I think as a financial actor in the system, we can be quite effective in ensuring that investor money is getting to the right place at the same time fulfilling their long-term objectives that they have in serving their clients. And it could be dignity and retirement, or it could be building wealth and an endowment. So they're simultaneous goals, and we don't think they're in conflict. In fact, they're congruent in many cases. but we have to be very deliberate about the purpose of the organization to ensure that we actually deliver on what are effectively multiple goals.
Tanya, over to you.
So Keaton, I think for us, we're very fortunate that the value that we have lived since inception is ingrained in how we do everything at Investec. So our purpose is to create enduring worth, living in, not off society. And that really speaks to our whole ambition around sustainability, because first and foremost, it talks about enduring. And enduring means that there's a long-term focus. It's not a short-term focus. It needs to last. And then we speak of worth, not value, not profit, but worth. So it's more than just money. How are we creating value in communities, in society, in environment? And then the last piece, living in, not off society, means we do it in a way that we're so conscious of the communities around us, of our own staff, and our environment and the natural resources and the limits that we are operating within. So our purpose has been our driving force and really guides our ambition around sustainability.
Thank you, Tanya. Do you feel there's an alignment from the board all the way to the front line, those that really have to get it done, execute, good in the community, good at work, good for the broader world? Is there resistance, and how do you overcome it?
So we have been on this sustainability journey for more than 20 years. And I have to be honest, it wasn't always plain sailing. Through the years, there's been lots of ups and downs. Some executive bought in immediately, some didn't. In fact, when I took over sustainability 10 years ago, two of the leaders said, "Why are you bothering? No one cares about sustainability." And look where we are 10 years later. So for me, it's about taking people on that journey with you. And every single person that I win and that crosses the line with me is a victory, because I know they will help me to get the next person across the line. So no, in the past, we did have resistance, but now I see that we really are getting to a point where there is alignment from the board all the way down.
Thank you. Tanya, is there a tipping point in terms of sustainable engagement where the agenda goes from one being pushed down, top down, to one that is, or even by you, as you said, or to one that is internalized in the organization?
Well, our experience is really, it needs to be both. It can't be just, top down or just bottom up. You need both to happen, and you need them both to happen at the same time. So we had a groundswell from the youth within Investec wanting more in this space, wanting to be more active, wanting to take more responsibility and shift this into business as opposed to just being an operation. But at the same time, we also had a lot of our leadership starting to question and wonder. I think it's a little bit of the age, and they're starting to question their own legacies. So we really had both top down and bottom up. And I believe that's the best way, because that's when it really gets entrenched in the DNA of the organization.
Marissa, how do you see that alignment and the constraints and how you overcome them?
I took on the role of helping to build a sustainability practice in the fall of 2017. And I somewhat cheekily say that I went from running a very big business, a very big P&L part of the bank, to being this annoying startup that was agitating for change from the sidelines. I felt like I was constantly pushing, trying to raise awareness, helping my colleagues to try to appreciate and understand how serious this was, how big it was, how impactful it was going to be for every facet of their business, whether they were a coverage officer calling on a private client, or whether an investment bank or talking to the corporates and so on. And what happened was about 2.5 years into that journey, I feel I went from being pushing the agenda to all of a sudden, we tipped over to a different place where now the inbound is extraordinary. So the desire on the part of my colleagues to engage in this topic, and it truly is all over the bank. So it's our front-facing divisions, so those who are serving clients, but it's also our corporate functions. Our real estate team is constantly saying, how do we challenge ourselves to, push the sustainability agenda? Our employees are volunteering everywhere to throw in good ideas about how we could make ourselves a better organization and so on. So to answer your question, this journey has been one where I think when you are a change agent, you have to figure out a way to capture hearts and minds. But if you do it effectively, then you reach a tipping point, and then it becomes somewhat organic, and you know that it's begun to be embedded in your organization.
Rick, let me ask you to come in on that. Has State Street passed a tipping point, do you feel? Is there an alignment, therefore, through the ranks that we're now on the other side?
Yeah, they're difficult expressions, tipping points. Let me just say that in 2018, the board took responsibility by changing its charter for material ESG issues. So it came right from the top of the organization that ESG had a materiality for State Street that needed top level attention, and that's been enhanced ever since. And then I think you can talk about tipping points in terms of employees and customers. But for us, one of the tipping points, for example, was the Fearless Girl campaign. So that was a campaign that saw a physical presence on Wall Street of the famous girl on Wall Street, but also accompanied by policy changes at State Street Global Advisors and how they'd address companies that had a lack of diversity on the board, initially gender and more recently ethnic diversity, and to match actions with words, not just engaging with boards that had no women, but eventually voting against them. And I think it had an amazing galvanizing effect on the employees. Now, it raised a lot of interesting questions in our own organization. Do we have a good level of female representation at senior levels? And that was exactly the sort of painful conversation that a tipping point needs to say, actually, this is a galvanizing moment. We know it's important from an investment perspective. We need to look at ourselves as well very, very carefully. But it was a sort of thing that can really build a lot of very powerful engagement and lead to change. And I think when you look at those networks that we have within financial service organization, our professional women's network and our environmental and sustainability network, they are by far the biggest internal networks. And that's telling you that employees really care about these things. I would be the first to admit that there are also generational shifts that will take a while. So you'll have people who've been doing a job for maybe 20 or 30 years very successfully without necessarily considering those issues. But the younger generation of analysts, portfolio managers and bankers, I think take it in their stride and they say, well, it's just a normal process of evaluating an investment to understand the dimensions and the externalities. So I think that change is the slow moving tipping point, Keaton, if I can put it that way, as opposed to a sudden kind of Minsky moment.
By the way, Keaton, if I may, I would wholly concur. We've had similar moments like that, inflection points in the journey. We, in the same vein as you with the gender equation, we produced a research report way back when, before it was fashionable, so to speak, trying to, with an academically rigorous way, see if there was a correlation, if not a causation, between female representation and leadership and performance. And that was a seminal piece that we put out. And it was a moment for employees to be proud of a piece of research that was buried historically in a department that typically didn't necessarily touch the rest of the organization. And we saw people wanting to engage on that topic. And then, just as you said, then they started to look inward and say, okay, well, if this is really true, is the senior leadership representative of what you're finding in your research? And are we exhibiting best practice? So we see the same phenomenon. We also see the exact same phenomenon coming from our younger generation, pushing us on these topics, because it's very much an activist generation and they want to get involved and they want to be a part of devising their own future. And we see this almost in a stark way, because in our private bank, where we're banking the world's ultra high net worth individuals, these are very privileged next gen children who are either going to inherit great wealth or sometimes the family corporation. And they are extraordinary in terms of their clarity of purpose about reshaping their company, their family company that might be a high carbon emitter, or what they're going to do with their wealth in terms of deploying it for good. So it's quite inspiring. And there's a sort of a little bit of a halo effect when we're engaging with this type of client base in terms of its effect on our organization.
Let me come to the topic of business cases. Are you forming a business case for the things that you wish to do that make an impact?
Well, first, I don't know whether I'm a little depressed by the idea that you need a business case before you start to pay attention to diversity, for example. I mean, there are some things that are just, they're essential and right in their own good. But I agree with you that certainly for those investors who have a fiduciary obligation, turning it into a an argument about future returns and revenues is vital. And that's why sometimes the blending of philanthropy, multilateral development banks and others is so critical in drawing in private capital, which is financially motivated primarily, even though there's an interest in doing good as well. I think we need to retune the gears a little bit in our global financial system to make sure that that's working as effectively as it can. There is a lot of philanthropic capital. I'm sure there's a lot in Maurice's private bank. And there's a lot of capital from multilateral development banks who can take risks that long-term pension fund investors can't. But we may need to rekindle our thinking and change the mix a little bit to make that more effective. Because it is true that those investors who are fiduciaries do get anxious about the risks they run individually or as an entity if they appear to have neglected that duty.
Tanya, in your experience at Investec, does capital flow better through philanthropy or business cases? And would you bring in the context of the fact that you're a business grounded in Africa?
My concern is that philanthropy is not sustainability. It's not sustainable. That is giving capital away, and that's definitely not the space that we would want to play in terms of sustainability. For me, sustainable business is one where you are still continuing to see returns and make a profit, but at the same time, you are able to maximize your impact from a social and environmental perspective. So there are two different things. Philanthropy is once off, you're not looking at the resilience, you're not trying to set up long-term. So definitely it's through business and through our business activities that we will have the greatest impact.
Thank you. Marisa, if we take a business case approach underpinned by values, do we allocate more capital than we would do if it was just philanthropy? Are you finding you're allocating huge amounts of capital because there is a business case?
And so I might answer it in a different way because the world that I operate in is very much the for-profit investing world. So we have a separate division that speaks to our philanthropy efforts, either ours as an organization or services our clients. But what I spend my time mostly doing is making the case for sustainable investing. And it very much depends, if we're speaking in the private client realm, of how you approach it by virtue of the type of client that you're speaking to. So what do I mean by that? If we have a great philanthropist who has never done impact investing, they may culturally say, anything that does good belongs in this box. Anything that is in my investing bucket is actually really all about returns. I mean, this is when we're talking about people who are just beginning this journey. You need to, for that type of individual, you need to express to them that in the investing bucket, you can do both. But I won't capture their hearts and minds if I start with a prospect of something that is a concessionary return instrument. What they're saying is my investing bucket is designed to achieve a market rate or better return for that given asset class. So what I need to then demonstrate to them is those investments that I'm putting them in, whatever the asset class is, that we seek to achieve a market rate or better return or beating the benchmark or what have you for the given asset class. That gets them then to say, okay, well, if I know I'm going to do that as my baseline or that's the objective, and I can do something positive for society on top, now I've got the holy grail. So that tends to be the way that they come along the journey. There's the inverse of that, which are clients who are experimenting already with the notion of putting capital to work for good. And oftentimes if they have the success stories, they become the ambassador for sustainable investing or impact. And then oftentimes, once they see that success and the impact that they can make and they become the storytellers, then they might experiment a little more and say, you know what, my capital did something very powerful. I want to actually go the next step and make it catalytic capital, in which case I might provide that capital that unlocks the ability to break something free. And therefore, I'm prepared to take perhaps less than markets.
So which SDGs do you target, if that's how you look at the world?
I think the dominant one for us has to be climate. Just all the ramifications of climate are so significant that they sort of dominate all others, because without tackling climate effectively, The others are damaged in a sense, potentially directly or indirectly anyway. So for us, top of the tree is climate change and how we can navigate effectively. And we know that there are trillions of dollars a year needed in investment spending, but also an enormous mission to ensure that there is adaptation in those countries, particularly in emerging economies, that are actually already suffering from the physical effects of climate change. I think away from climate, I think for us it would be gender, and again, led from Fearless Girl in the first instance, and how we've been strong advocates, obviously, for gender equality in our own industry and in the portfolio companies that we own. So we do have 5 SDGs that we support from a corporate perspective, but the two would be those two would be the dominant issues.
Chris, I'm going to ask you the same question from a slightly different lens. I know you've had an approach to looking at certain SDGs that seem like they're intractable, and you've addressed those and sought to apply finance to those. Would you step back and tell us, how did you look at the SDGs as an organization, target them, select, prioritize, and then mobilize capital?
So it's interesting because when I started down the sustainability journey and I had a clean sheet of paper and said, where do we want to take this effort? I did ask myself the question, do we want to be known for something? Do we want to be the climate bank or the bank of gender equality or something of that nature? And what I very quickly realized as I started to engage with our clients, and I think it is partly unique in the sense that if you're a wealth manager, the values alignment becomes very personal. So one family cares about education, the next one about gender, and the next one about ocean conservation. And we need to have an answer or response for that. So in the realm of product creation is where we really bring the SDGs into play. So I challenged my team to map the UN SDGs from the lens of where is private capital flowing, where is it actually working well, and where is there a dearth of private capital. And so the places where it's working well, but yet we know we just need more and more and more of it, I've then said, what if we can just use our distribution power, our strength, to amplify what's working well. So take something like green energy, wind and solar. We just need more and more and more and more and more. And so we can be part of that machine of capital at scale. But on the complete other end of the spectrum, when you get really deep into topics that are tricky or intractable, I challenged our teams to say, is there a fundamental reason why there is a dearth of capital? Is it because that SDG is really, really uninvestable from a returns point of view, and it's truly better left to government? And I believe the SDGs were never designed to be an investment framework per se. They're a way to categorize the world's challenges. So we aren't saying that they have to all be investable in the classic sense. And peace and justice that Rick, you highlighted is a good one. To me, it's very hard to think of a for return instrument that would target that. On the other hand, it led us to very interesting places. So one in particular has been the oceans. SDG 14, life below water, second least invested of the SDGs from a private capital point of view. And we did ask ourselves the question, are the oceans uninvestable? Or what is the reason for this phenomenon? And when we started to engage with the asset managers, those running big pools of capital, what we found is that they universally said they'd love to put capital to work in the oceans. They just did not have any structures that spoke to their needs as institutional investors. We said, well, this is something that we can attack. So then we spent time to create an institutional grade fund at scale in the public equities market that draws a direct link through shareholder engagement and ocean outcomes. And then when we were able to deliver that investment strategy to our clients in that wrapper, it was a phenomenal success, and we galvanized. It's an open-ended fund, but we've galvanized hundreds of millions, and we've tipped over the $500 million mark in a very short period of time. So those success stories are very, very energizing for the organization. Now I can see the power of that success story and the story that then gets told. At all corners of our bank, people cannot wait to talk about the oceans. They're proud and they want to wave the banner for the oceans. And then that created its own almost ripple effect of ocean engagement, as we call it. And so there are many other places where we're spending time like that, animal conservation, biodiversity, places that we may not be successful in every case, but we're going to give it a try to experiment, and in hopes that either we can create something that's successful and we can replicate it many times over, or each time we do it, it gets bigger. And so then you're getting to the scale game.
Tanya, how do you do that at Investec?
So we assessed what are the biggest socioeconomic issues in our core geographies. So that happens to be the UK and South Africa. And the biggest socioeconomic issues that we found, actually not too unaligned, even though we're in the developed world and the developing world. Essentially, we struggling with, and this is the case across the world, inequality and climate action. And if we can address those two, we will multiply our impact in other areas. So those are our overarching SDGs that we would focus on, but they're country SDGs, not company, not corporate SDGs. So we then look at 6 other SDGs, which we believe links to our business capabilities, our expertise, and that's where we will be able to address the issues of inequality and climate action.
Tanya, particularly in your part of the world, as you say, there's 2 parts of the world. Would you give us an Africa example too?
Well, I personally am most passionate about SDG 6. For me, everyone says you can't have a favorite. That's my favorite SDG. You have to have access to clean water to live. We can live without energy. We've got the sun, there are other ways you can make a fire, etc. But you cannot survive if you don't have clear water. So for me, SDG 6 is the first and foremost way we will address poverty, hunger, inequality, etc. Secondly is SDG 7. Similarly, access to clean energy, renewable energy. For me, that's the second most important SDG. And it's through 6 and 7 that we can then look at the other SDGs. We can then bring in infrastructure. How do we get that water to the farms, to agriculture, to be able to grow enough food? How do we get that energy to rural businesses so that they can create economies, rural economies? So 6 and 7 for me are the most important SDGs. And that's the way that we at Investec will ensure that we're having a broader impact. 6, 7, focusing on economic growth and focusing on infrastructure, and lastly, focusing on sustainable cities.
What is your role? What is the actual role of you as a financial service institution making that difference, Tanya?
Keaton, I think that it's definitely through our ability to finance, different solutions. We have the ability, given our presence in the developed world, to bring expertise, knowledge to Africa. For example, we funded a client who came up with a more efficient way of flushing toilets, much more efficient way of flushing toilets. So during the Cape Town drought, we brought that client to South Africa, to Cape Town, and they've now installed that system in many of the offices around the country. So it's the ability to match finance with solutions that solve for these problems.
That's very, very interesting. I'm going to ask this group to reflect on the idea that you're participating in so many forums. And based on our work looking at your initiatives, we see you're in many summits and working groups with transnational organizations, industry groups, governments, NGOs, and so on. What do you think makes these work well? And what do you think is missing?
They have to be complementary. So there are many people who would want to have a partnership with a financial institution. And I haven't come across many, or even any actually, who don't have a very good proposition. But to the extent they overlap with other things that we're already doing, it's difficult to support all of them. So they have to be complementary. There has to be a good two-way flow. What do I mean there? We love to partner with people who've got knowledge that we don't have, and so we can import that intellectual property into our organization and become a better organization by virtue of that. But also that there's a fair exchange, that for one reason or another, we can help them. And often we can help them with our convening power, because we are a kind of center point for many asset managers and asset owners through the relationships we have with the custody bank. And that can often be helpful in sort of gathering people together in a way that's effective. I think there are many a kind of cross between think tanks, NGOs, special purpose, and I think they all play their part. They're all very, very interesting. But what I always look for is depth, real depth in understanding an issue in a way that is phenomenal, and frankly, we would not necessarily be able to do on our own. And there you've got a real goldmine, because you've got an ability to engage with your own staff on an important issue that you wouldn't ordinarily have dealt with. And you're also able to have an impact and draw the financial institution in that direction. And I think that can be a real win-win, to coin a phrase.
Thank you. As we draw this to a conclusion, let me ask you to comment on one thing very briefly, please. There's a notion that if only financial institutions would hand over 1%, 3%, sometimes people say 5% of the capital they manage, that money could then be applied to the SDGs. We would solve the SDGs. What is your experience of that idea? And what do you think of whether that is a solution?
It can't be left only in the hands of the financial institutions, just as it cannot be left only in the hands of government. You know, this whole space started as under the presumption that the world's big challenges really were purview for government or philanthropists. And when the UN SDGs were formed and people started to actually try to put a number to the gaps, the funding gaps of what it would take to get there by then 2030, what we found was there wasn't enough government money nor philanthropic capital in the world to get there, and we needed the private sector. So I think anyone who says it's a problem of banks or financial institutions, or anyone who says it's only government, is missing the point. It's in every sector of finance or capital provision. Public private has to be focused on attacking the problem. So I'm not sure if I'm fully answering the question that you're asking, but I think we absolutely can do our part. And the places where I think we need a combination of effort is particularly in climate change. We need a lot of capital to flow through to the early stage disruptive technologies that have a real fighting chance of breakthrough technology to help us get on a true net zero pathway in hard to abate sectors. So that's a place that's critical, and we can facilitate that as banks. We also equally need, in my opinion, an enormous amount of capital to fund the historic traditional industries in their transition of their business plans to more sustainable solutions. That's also going to require trillions of capital. So both ends of that spectrum, I think we have a big role to play, and that is a place for private sector. Really is a place for the private sector. Maybe sometimes in cooperation with government or those who can take risk off the table or provide a credit wrapper or an enhancement to crowd in returns. But fundamentally, I think we should own that. But as it relates to the policy piece of it or some of those other concessionary catalytic spaces, then I think we should do it in partnership with those who are better suited to do that because that's their patch.
Tanya, what's your perspective on that?
I think that it's a very generalist view to just throw out a number and say that's how much you should give. I have a problem with the word give because once again, that's then philanthropy. It's not sustainable finance. So I think that, all financial institutions are doing an immense amount of work around financing the SDGs. I don't think they're just, putting a percentage. They're all doing it anyway. For us, we're already giving a percentage to CSI. For me, it's much more impactful to understand where's the need and what are the barriers to entry? What role can we play? Yes, there's a financing role, but there's also an advocacy role. There's also a element of the first world aren't able to bring those funds and bring that capital to where it's needed because there's country risk and there's currency risk. So there are barriers to entry in doing that. So for me, the most important role that finance can play is helping to open up and create the right environment, that enabling environment that the money can go to where it's most needed. But I don't see it in just a flat, every bank gives 5% away. I think it's got to be seen in a much broader context.
Tanya, do you have an example for us of something that Investec did that made a huge impact?
So Keaton, I think we've got many examples, and that's what I love about this space because there's so many stories and beautiful stories. One of my favorites is a project that we do on the border of the Kruger National Park, where we're not even talking about nature and how important biodiversity is to our sustainability. So this project brought in massive solar water towers, and through that they were able to provide water for the communities. I love it because firstly, they make women run it. Women they take ownership of it, and it gives them that sense of self and empowerment. And two, it's got such impact because it's not just one family or one household, it's a whole community that are impacted. Another one I love is we did through export and credit finance, a financing of a hospital in Ghana. And that's amazing to be able to put a facility in this day and age where COVID is, so prevalent, to able to give people access to healthcare. That's massive. That's, better than painting some walls in the local charity. So yeah, those are just some of the examples that we're really proud of.
Thank you. Rick.
Yeah, grand idea. And I think one has to start by saying, whose money is it that you're going to take and deliver for that worthy cause? It all belongs to someone. It's either the shareholders, the clients, somebody. And equally, there's nothing wrong with tax. We need taxes. The question is, how do you design a tax that takes the money in the form of a capital tax or an income tax in a way that's seen to be fair and is efficient from an economic perspective, and deliver it to where it's needed? I think it's a legitimate question to ask, should there be some sort of global contribution, particularly when you think about how the emerging economies are going to struggle with the adaptations needed for climate change. But I think pointing to the entire financial system and saying that should be taken as if there's no actual owner of the capital is a little difficult to deal with. I think it's more straightforward to say we need a tax. If we need a tax, let's get at it and design an economically effective one that's very broad and could involve capital.
Finally, COP26 is looming, and there's a lot of excitement, of course, and we've seen the world mobilize capital and commitments unprecedented in history around this. If COP26 is a big success and you're looking back on it and reflecting at the end of COP26, what do you think would have happened? Marisa?
Well, my number one hope is that we have global alignment on some form of agreement of a carbon tax. So a global price on carbon and a mechanism that is fair and just across borders, but that actually does price in the negative effects of everything that we're doing, particularly, obviously, carbon emissions. Because if we're effectively able to put a price on carbon, and the financial system is incredibly efficient, and the money will flow, because I think most of us would agree that it's not a capital problem, it's a capital allocation issue, getting it to the right place where it's needed under the right conditions fast enough. And I think that would be a materially positive outcome if we were to get there. And I know how hard that is, but that would be my wish if we were successful.
Excellent. What a great wish. Rick, same question for you.
It's somewhere between a prediction and a wish, Keaton. So I'd certainly endorse the idea of carbon pricing, putting a proper price on carbon and internationalizing that is vital. At the same time, cutting subsidies to carbon related activities is important as well. I think for me, the $100 billion that we need flowing from developed to emerging economies is vital. And we seem to be getting much closer to that. It's vital because the emerging economies need to grow, and their decarbonisation story, frankly, is a lot more difficult than it is for the developed economies. So we absolutely need that. And to really make that work properly, we need a little bit of fine-tuning on the way that the multilateral development banks are working. Whether we'll get that out of COP26, I don't know. But I think that would be a good follow-on to say that we really need to supercharge the money that is available by a more effective way of using those MDBs. I'm optimistic we'll get at least one of the three that we've both been talking about.
Tanya, what do you wish for from COP26?
So Keaton, I remember going to COP in Durban. I think it was, but just over 10 years ago. And no one in my office, in my circle of friends, had ever heard of COP26. They couldn't even tell me what it stood for. They had no idea. I think of that difference to what it is today, where it's in every headline at the moment, it's in every newspaper, and everyone's asking that exact question. What do you expect from COP? And it's not just NGOs and activists. You've got everyone involved. The biggest, institutions are coming forward and participating. So I am very optimistic about this COP26. Personally, for us living in South Africa, with my South African perspective, I'm really hoping that those financial commitments from the developed world materialize into something much more impactful. It needs to be much more concrete what those commitments are. And then those countries would need to be held accountable. So if I reflect back in 5 or 10 years' time, I would want to see this as the COP that truly brought forth action. Paris set the vision, it set the target of where we need to go to, but Glasgow needs to be the one that really implements action.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks for being so open and so direct about what really needs to happen to make big change happen in the world.
Pleasure.
John, that was a very interesting panel on how we really get things done. What did you take away, John, from that one?
Yeah, I was struck by the clear need for more organizations to reach and pass the tipping point from a pull to a push, if you will. So not just a pull from the C-suite, but a push from below the organization as a whole and embracing it top to bottom, as well as the inside and out of it, so that there's really both these forces at work, from top to bottom, bottom to top, and inside and out. And I think we're starting to see that, and we need to see the tipping point become more prevalent. Part of this is generational. As we discussed in the very beginning, there's a new generation, and the new generation has a new set of values, and they will be felt throughout the workplace and throughout these institutions. So I think we're at the beginning stages of seeing that real effect of so-called Gen Z, but it will be felt throughout the organizations of the world. And perhaps last, I took away on my end that we need an investment framework for large-scale innovation. And an acceleration to this innovation so that it can really come to market. And if I might end on a more optimistic note about the pandemic, we did see that with the vaccines for the pandemic. It was large-scale innovation, and it did come to market in record time. So I think this is a bit of a path forward that we can see from our recent collective experience.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I think you've hit so many of the right points for us as we close this session. Let me draw out some of the big insights to take away from the 3 panels that we've had today at the UN's World Investment Forum. Firstly, the pandemic was a red line between a carbon past and a cleaner, more equitable and sustainable future. Secondly, we're all in it together, as the pandemic showed, on all issues though, not just the pandemic. Thirdly, finance issues and solutions need to come together across public, private, and development finance, and it has to be beyond philanthropy. So it's truly scalable and sustainable. It has to give a return so that people can still meet their commitments to pay salaries, pensions, taxes, and keep investing. If we're to close a gap of $100 trillion, we will need radical solutions to how capital will flow. And this endeavor will be the biggest that the industry, the finance industry, but all industries have probably undertaken in all of human history, because it's a leap to make a new kind of civilization, a new world. And time is short, and that requires an alignment of values that shape behaviors across all stakeholders, underpinned by commercial gains, risk-taking, and innovation, and a new collaborative effort. The big ideas and requirements that also came up as we posed this question that was posed at the beginning of the whole UN World Investment Forum on how do we fund the SDGs and make sure there is real, true mass inclusion across the world. Our report says that's $100 trillion in 10 years. These are some of the most important 10 ideas that came up across the 3 panels that we've run. Number 1, a new Bretton Woods agreement for finance to address the wider needs of the planet and of people. Number 2, systemic change to address the flow of funds. Number 3, transition management to safeguard people that will lose out, to create a bridge to the future. Number 4, many financial products are social products, like insurance, mortgages, pensions, and these need to be made accessible and affordable and scaled for all. So there is true inclusion, true mass inclusion, and technology today enables that. And so the technology industry has a huge role to play. Next, begin with engagement and investment to support transition, and if possible, move that straight to people getting involved and actually transitioning to a cleaner model, and if not, to divest. And that's probably quite a tough and ruthless endeavor, but probably needs to happen. Next was regulation to accelerate the transition to support asset allocators. That took us then to the idea that we need to establish a basic security package. It came up a number of times across the panels, which include food, water, and the home as the highest priorities. The idea of a contribution tax to meet the SDG goals was also floated as an important idea to explore and to figure out if we can make happen. And then funding those left out, and also funding the future with innovation, real breakthrough innovation, at the same time as rolling out what we know today and have today to make the world better. And then finally, to learn the lessons from the enormous endeavor that's led to climate change in COP26 alignment. And for the rest of the SDGs to simplify, mobilize, and gain the commitment from capital, industry, and the world at large for all the SDGs. Let me close by saying thank you for attending this session and to attending all our 3 panels at the World Investment Forum with Force for Good. We wish you well and hope you will be a force for good too for the world. Thank you.